We're going to take down Big Meatball over this. Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hi, I'm Phil, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
I'm Kate, and I'm doing this again. I'm just happy to be here.
So we're back for more Dave Grossman, and we are going to continue our conversation we had from last episode, where I introduced you to the idea that Dave Grossman waged his war against the alleged menace of violent video games through a three-pronged attack: information, legislation, and litigation. And last time, we talked about some of the ways he spread his message about video games being murder simulators, training young people to kill. These included interacting with anti-media groups like the National Institute on Media and the Family, as well as some groups that really don't like certain segments of the population that aren't, white conservative Christians. And we also learned how he may have gotten involved into the violent video game research game by learning about Vincent Matthews and Indiana University's brain studies alleging a link between violent media exposure, such as violent video games, and impeded functions in the frontal lobes of the brain. And that these studies have really uncomfortable, some would say ethically compromising connections to the self-proclaimed killologist, thanks to the Center for Successful Parenting. That pretty much covers the information section of our symposium and segues well into the second prong in Grossman's war against Urban Strike, the sequel to Jungle Strike. Legislation, wherein the self-proclaimed killologist advocated for laws that either restricted access to violent video games or banned their content outright. And when it comes to legislation, what's really interesting is that in On Killing, Grossman, for the most part, dismissed laws banning violent video game content as censorship that potentially violated the First Amendment, and recommended people focus on other methods of shutting down the likes of Unjam or Lammy than legislation, such as public denunciations and threats of lawsuits. Writing, quote, "There may be a legitimate place for new laws and legal constraints in our future, but oppression of one sort can never truly be relieved by other forms of oppression. And in today's video society, it would be difficult to completely squelch all manifestations of violence enabling," end quote. Later adding, quote, "There's a sound argument for changing the way we view and apply First Amendment rights, but I do not advocate it. I do, however, believe that the time has come for our society to censure, not censor, those who exploit violence for profit," end quote. So that's where he's at in his first book, On Killing. And all that being said, Grossman almost immediately changed his tune after he got famous. And despite his earlier assertions of the power of freedom of speech, he was clearly not above a little bit of oppression when it helped enhance his brand. As we covered in our Brown v. EMA episode, in the years following Columbine, there was a groundswell of bills introduced across the country addressing video game violence. For example, between 2000 and 2002 alone, there were bills regulating access to violent video games broadly defined, introduced in at least 16 states. And it wasn't uncommon for Grossman to appear as a self-proclaimed expert for lawmakers interested in pushing for laws banning video game violence in some shape or form. For example, in January 1999, Washington State Representatives Mary Lou Dickerson and Ida Biosiotes introduced House Bill 1315, a bill that would, and this is from a news report on it, quote, "order the State Department of Health to study the effects the gory games have on children and seek ways to help parents control access to the games," end quote. And to help persuade their fellow lawmakers on the necessity of the bill, they invited Grossman to speak at a public hearing held on February the 10th, 1999. In 2000, he was in Illinois, where State Attorney General Jim Ryan pushed for a campaign against M-rated video games, calling upon retailers to stop carrying them and promoting more information for parents regarding the ESRB. And at his side, during an October the 19th, 2000 announcement of his initiative, was Grossman, who explained to a reporter for the Springfield-based State Journal Register, quote, "The law is our most powerful form of education. The law is not the cure-all, end-all, but it is part of the solution," end quote. And even when Grossman did not directly intervene, he made his way into anti-video game legislation throughout the 2000s, as we learned with Lee's bill. His talking points come in, his research he's helping to back comes into it. So he becomes a really influential driving force in lawmakers then saying we need to restrict access because, of course, based on these not problematic studies, that it definitely causes harm. And as we've already covered in previous episodes, his talking points also wormed their way into the highest echelons of power, as various local, state, and federal lawmakers championed Grossman's ideas about video games as murder simulators training our kids to kill. For example, on September the 14th, 1999, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Orrin Hatch put out a statement on youth violence, asserting a close relationship between exposure to violent media and real-world violence. And as part of his statement, he quoted directly from On Killing, explaining, quote, "Violent video games have an effect on children similar to that of violent television and film. Some experts suggest an even greater pernicious effect, concluding that the violent actions performed in playing video games are more conducive to children's aggression. As one expert concludes, and this is where he's paraphrasing Grossman, we're not just teaching kids to kill, we're teaching them to like it," end quote.
Kevin,
What's up?
that sounds like a good time to insert that Darman joke you were planning.
Kate and I talked off mic about having some way of bringing. Do you know who Darman is, Phil?
No.
Do you want to explain who Darman is to?
Fine, I'll look him up. Hang on. So let me find him. He is an American entrepreneur and film producer, according to the internet. Basically, he makes these short morality play videos online, but with like the clickbaitiest titles like, stepmom doesn't buy stepson a PS5. You won't believe what happens next. Things like that. And often they're just extremely straightforward. Like there's this one where these two people are going into work. We have to go in today because we're going to get the big promotion maybe. And one of them stops to help a person whose car is broken down. And the other guy's like, well, you're just going to stay here. You're going to be late for the meeting. You're not going to get promoted. And then lo and behold, at the end, it turns out the person who they helped was the boss's mother. And so the boss is like, well, you were nice to my mom, so I'm going to give you the promotion instead of the person who I just gave the promotion to, and $1 million and a new car and a PS5. And I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's sort of like that sort of ultra simplistic stuff. As a side note, I've learned that one of the few benefits of these videos are that due to the nature of the pacing and the language used, they can be useful tools for teaching English as a second language. But the only nice thing I can say about it, and more recently, yeah, Darman got into some hot water regarding the way that he was treating his actors. None of the actors in these videos are in the Screen Actors Guild, unions. They make scale. Some of these people, like, I've been working for him for 7 or 8 years, and there's a lot you could read about it if you're interested. It did not go well, and he acted pretty shamefully, in my opinion.
Yeah, and he's got a cadence to him when he talks. He does this sort of over-the-top, like, YouTuber kind of cadence. So, like, he always ends his things by saying, we're not just making videos, we're changing lives, I think is what he says. But he says it like this. He goes, we're not just he over-enunciates, and, like, all of his speech is, like, right in the front of his mouth. It's like, we are not just making videos, we're changing lives.
I'm trying to find a clip of it, of that, so that you can hear it. I wonder if he stopped being in his own videos.
We were discussing that Dave Grossman could potentially be like, have like a Darman thing. Is like, we're not just teaching kids to kill, we're teaching them to like it.
So Darman as in Dharma, like the teaching of the Buddha, is that the reference?
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't believe it's his real name.
All right, so that basically covers the legislation stuff. Again, he either gets directly involved with various video game legislative bills that, restrict access in some ways to quote unquote violent video games, or you have lawmakers and policymakers who are citing his work, either directly or indirectly. Again, these ideas that video games are murder simulators end up kind of permeating through a lot of the discourse over video games at this time. The final prong in Grossman's war on video games, and this should be our favorite one, I think, today, was litigation. As he explained during a talk at a law enforcement conference in Nebraska in late April 1999, he felt the games industry should be, quote, sued right down to the bottom of their socks, end quote. Or as he said more directly to a reporter for the Memphis, Tennessee-based Commercial Appeal a year earlier, quote, we're within just about a year of doing to the television networks what we've done to the tobacco industry. We're going to sue the bastards, end quote. And Grossman felt that one of the best ways to keep video game manufacturers from peddling their mind-warping smut was to make them so afraid of civil lawsuits that they wouldn't need censorship laws, they'd censor themselves. This is a legal situation known as a chilling effect, in which individuals or groups will restrain their own free speech rights for fear of litigation. And it didn't take long for Grossman to find some aspiring barristers looking to make a name for themselves as the person who took on the video game industry. For example, on April the 19th, 2001, Nebraska lawyer John DeCamp filed a $5 billion lawsuit against AOL Time Warner, Nintendo of America, and Sony Computer Entertainment, among other companies, on behalf of the family of one of the victims of the Columbine shooting, alleging violent media was responsible and explaining in a statement, quote, absent the combination of extremely violent video games and these boys' incredibly deep involvement, use of, and addiction to these games and the boys' basic personalities, these murders and this massacre would not have occurred, end quote. later adding games like Doom and Quake turned the shooters into, quote, monster killers, end quote. And unsurprisingly, DeCamp cited the works of Dave Grossman and asserted the Killologist would be an expert witness in the trial. And as an aside, we're going to take a closer look at John DeCamp and his lawsuit in a future episode that I'm specifically planning on Doom and Columbine. Because without spoiling too much, DeCamp is one of the wildest figures I've ever come across while doing this show. So tune into that next time when we start learning about the illustrious career of Mr. John DeCamp. But speaking of litigation, you know who else was a disciple of Grossman? Someone who we may have covered in the past, was long-standing beef with video games and some access to the American legal system? Who might we know that might fit that description?
Is it our boy JT?
Oh yeah, it is J-Town time. Welcome back to the show, our old friend.
Maybe all these episodes are starting to run together for me. I could have swore he already entered the fray at some point.
We cover this topic this time. You're never very far from Mr. Jack Thompson. Jack knows how to make a scene, that's for sure.
He's like Beetlejuice. If you say his name into existence, he'll just pop up in one of these episodes.
Yeah, we say it one too many times, he's going to appear in my house.
Hey, you're going to summon him.
It's funny, too, because like Jack's been out of the game. Jack's been out of the game for over 10 years now. Every couple of years, someone will, like a Vice writer or like an Ars Technica writer, will seek him out and just ask his thoughts on stuff. His opinion has largely not changed. He remains convinced that the video game industry conspired against him, and that's the reason why he was disbarred, that they like silenced him. And he still remains convinced that he'll be vindicated in the end. He has never wavered, or at least when he talks to people, because again, people check in on him every couple of years. He still believes what he believed when he did this. The things that got him disbarred had never deterred him from his opinions on video games. Okay, so during the late 1980s and into the 1990s, lawyer, moral crusader, and all-around mature, stable adult John Bruce Jack Thompson spent the bulk of his public life harassing people in the recording industry, with some of his notable targets being radio shock jocks like Neil Rogers and Howard Stern, musicians like the guys in Two Live Crew, and political rivals like Janet Reno. And for more on that, check out our previous episodes on Jack Thompson. As we've covered in exhaustive detail, during the late 1990s, the Florida attorney shifted his righteous outrage to harassing people in the video game industry. And for new listeners, here's a brief highlight reel of some of the things Jack Thompson did during his personal war against video games. Engaged in personal, vindictive, and at times hilariously immature harassment campaigns against game companies, journalists, and legal opponents. Filed numerous frivolous lawsuits against Rockstar and Take-Two, accusing them of participating in organized crime and engaging in an elaborate conspiracy to use the legal system and their connections in Washington to silence him. Commissioned a video game in which all of his personal enemies were brutally killed, promising a $10,000 charitable donation, a donation he reneged on when someone took him up on it, then called the cops on the makers of the webcomic Penny Arcade when they made the donation on his behalf, was permanently disbarred in 2008 thanks to his well-documented history of personal misconduct and harassment, and during his hearing he accused the judge disbarring him of not being a real judge, in between likening himself to John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. And for all of that and more, check out our two-part series on Mr. Jack Thompson. And to hear Jack tell it, we have Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman to thank for that, because by Jack's own admission, the self-proclaimed killologist is the person who sicked Thompson onto video games in the first place. More than that, Jack viewed Dave as a friend and a kindred spirit. In many respects, Jack and Dave were cut from the same cloth. They were both hardline conservatives, they're both evangelical Christians, and they both have some strong opinions about the role of media violence on children. And incidentally, as we covered in great length on the show, there are also two people with whom you must take everything they say with massive grains of salt, because they're both self-serving to a fault and possess a somewhat tenuous relationship with objective reality. In any case, Thompson saw Grossman as a direct inspiration for his moral crusade against video games, to the point that he devoted an entire section to his first meeting with the Lieutenant Colonel in his 2005 memoir, Out of Harm's Way. And with that in mind, we're going to try something a little different here on the show. Something I'm calling Scandalous Games Theatre. We're going to do a dramatic reading of the start of the epic bromance that was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman and John Bruce Thompson, as told through Thompson's memoir. So I've pulled some excerpts from Out of Harm's Way, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share you all a link. So I have a script here, and they're color-coded, so it's easy to see which ones you read. All right, so I'm putting in the chat here. Let me know if that link works.
Yes.
All right, so if it works for you, we have 3 roles in this. One is Jack's inner narrator, so that's the actual prose of the book. And then we have the dialogue for Jack and for Dave. If it's okay, I'll do the inner narrator just to move things along. And I may jump in at places to say, interject some things. Because, again, these guys are not really very strong truth tellers. But which one of you wants to be Jack and which one of you wants to be Dave?
I'll do the green one.
Okay, so you can do Jack.
And I'll be Dave Grossman. What do we think Dave sounds like, or what his motivation is like? Over enunciating? Like Darman? Is that how we want to play this?
That is up to you. I'd let you take this guy for a walk a little bit. He does have a thing he likes to say that I'm really eager to see how you say it. You'll see. You'll know it when you see it. Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. Okay, so let me set the scene a little bit here. So to contextualize where we are in Jack's book, Jack Thompson has recently learned of the Westside Middle School shooting, which was a school shooting at Jonesboro, Arkansas, which happened in Dave Grossman's hometown, which really became the jumping off point for him as a violent video game crusader, because a lot of people tried to get his 2 cents on this, and he kind of uses a jumping off point to his crusade. Jack Thompson is watching on television, allegedly, Jack Thompson is watching on television some hearing about the shooting, in which a teacher at Westside Middle School alleged that one of the shooters, a shooter named Mitchell Johnson, listened to a lot of hip hop and a lot of rap music, and trying to allege that somehow that caused the shooting. Go back to our previous episode because I'm pretty sure it didn't. But and he called this person to compliment them, and they put him in contact with Dave Grossman. And so there's a little bit of back and forth. And so now this is a phone conversation that Jack and Dave had. So I'm going to start us off. I'll read the yellow. Kate, you're going to read the green. And Phil, you're going to read the blue. All right. And I'm not going to do the Jack Thompson voice for this because it's a little long. After playing phone tag a bit, I caught up with Dave Grossman.
Colonel Grossman.
As soon as I said his name, I realized that the last time I addressed someone with that title, I was addressing Oliver North. We don't have time to talk about Ollie North. I got a chill up my spine as I suddenly felt as if maybe God had something in store for me with this colonel as well. I was soon to find out. He interrupted my opening sentence.
Please, call me Dave,
he said.
I'm not in the army anymore. I'm a civilian, just like you. How can I help you, sir?
It was obvious that this former military man had not lost his military speech habits.
Please, Dave, call me Jack.
Okay, Jack. What's up?
Dave, a teacher at your middle school here suggested I give you a call. As a lawyer, I've been involved in efforts against the entertainment industry for 11 years now. I want to know if I can help in any way.
I began to tell Colonel Grossman some of the things I had been involved in, when suddenly I heard this loud sound on the other end of the line. Here's your moment, Phil.
Oh!
You okay?
Grossman exclaimed.
I've been waiting for a long time to talk to a lawyer like you about this. I didn't think there was such an animal.
Excitedly, he continued.
Let me tell you all that I know about this, if you have time.
Are you kidding? I have all the time in the world.
That's because, as an aside, Jack Thompson was not doing the main work in the household. His wife was a corporate lawyer and was clearly the chief earner in the family. So they're not really relying on Jack. So Jack does have a lot of free time on his hands. But before he began, I had an urge to tell Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman something. I can't really explain why I felt compelled to tell him this bit of information right then. It didn't make sense to say this, but urges rarely do make sense. That's why we call them urges.
Dave, I think I should tell you that although I'm a lawyer, I'm also a Christian. What some would call a born-again Christian. I prefer just Christian, because as a follower of Christ, I'm a brother with anybody who claims his name, regardless of any other label.
Dave responded with an even louder,
Whoa!
Did you fall?
Okay. All right. I can't. Okay, here we go. Whoa! Here's what you can call me. Brother. I'm a Christian too. This is one reason I'm so passionate about this issue. There is a darkness spreading through American culture into the hearts of our children. I think God has brought you and me together to do something about that.
Sure, and I can call back when you're not on the toilet, by the way. The Hoooah sounded like he was in trouble.
Give me 1 second. Whoa! All right, I'm good. I'm good.
When I was reading that out loud, when I was pulling the clips together, I was read, Hoooah!
Is that how he does it?
I don't know. I've not looked too much into that. That is a thing he says, but I was reading it like a son of a woman, like Al Pacino. Hoooah!
Hoooah!
But I like your take on it. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair. Just jumping in, that in case you're curious how the self-proclaimed killologist says the phrase that video game newbie Phil Thomas delivered so perfectly during our recording, I've pulled up a recording that Dave Grossman published on his personal Twitter/X on June the 15th, 2023, that gives you a sampling of how he says that phrase. Now, I think we can all agree, however, that Phil Thomas's is a superior rendition to that. So without further ado, here is Dave Grossman giving us his catchphrase.
As we love our God, as we love our way of life, you walk out that door and you give 100%. In this dark and desperate hour, you believe in your God, you believe in our nation, you believe in our way of life. And as you do that, may God bless you, your family, every endeavor. And God bless America. Hoooah!
With that out of the way, back to the show. All right, back to Jax here. I had goosebumps all over talking with this brother in Christ on the phone. I remembered something my former pastor, Steve Brown, had said. If you feel the urge to share Jesus, do it, even if it seems to make no sense. You don't want to regret not having shared him. Dave and I were off and running, soon to be running in tandem. Dave said he was going to give me a crash course in violent entertainment and its effect on kids, as well as its role in school killings. He began.
I was an Army Ranger. I was trained to kill other human beings. And the men I served with were trained to kill other human beings. I never, as far as I know, killed anyone, but I served with and was around those who had. It takes a toll, killing other human beings. There is a cost, a price that is paid by a human being when he is trained to kill, when he does kill.
Dave explained that when he left the Rangers, he became a professor on the psychology at war at West Point. That's not true. He was basically an adjunct psychology professor as part of a fellowship program he did in his graduate program. So he's playing a little fast and loose with the truth there. His teaching there led him to write a book called On Killing, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, as we are too. The book recounts how a man is trained to kill and what the consequences are of training him to kill. Dave had coined the word killology to describe the body of knowledge about killing, what it takes to make a killer, and what it costs to be a killer.
I was in the triage units that were slapped together in Jonesboro,
he said.
We could talk about Jonesboro, but the case I really want to talk with you about is Paducah. I was an expert in that case.
Okay, a little bit of context here. First off, after the Westside Middle School shooting, Dave Grossman claims that he helped train the counselors for the school, that he talked with, the psychologist and the, religious leaders, which, as an aside, based on he's not qualified to do. He was never a certified counselor. So it all sounds kind of suspicious. And now he's saying he's in the triage units during it. This is the only place I've ever seen this mentioned. So one of two things is happening. Either Dave is lying to Jack, which is very possible given his past history, or Jack is misremembering the role that Dave Grossman alleges he had. But I've never seen anywhere else where he says he's got a triage. And so Paducah, by the way, this is again for context for you, Phil, from our last episode. Paducah was another school shooting. It was at Heath High School on December 1st, 1997 in Paducah, Kentucky. And so skipping ahead now, he goes into a bit about Michael Carneal, explaining that Diane Sheffley, a child psychologist brought in by Michael's defense to meet with him and offer psychological evaluation of him. And Dave claims that Sheffley said that Michael was obsessed with violent entertainment like Doom and the Basketball Diaries, and that Michael was acting out an exciting power fantasy. I have searched this. I have found no evidence of what he is claiming. Diane Sheffley is a child psychologist, or she at least was a child psychologist, and she did meet with Michael Carneal. But the reports that were in the Associated Press about their meeting talked more about his concerns over his bullying, being harassed in school. He also was dealing with a lot of mental health issues, hallucinations, paranoia. There was a lot going on with Michael, and no one who was involved in Michael's case took seriously the argument that violent video games played any role. Only Dave is really pushing for that kind of thing. And I have no evidence about Dave Grossman's involvement in the trial. So with all that out of the way, back to Kate. You're the next line.
Why didn't you testify at the trial?
I asked.
The defense decided not to use me. The families of the victims, though, know what my testimony would have been, and they're not too thrilled with me. They think I'm trying to excuse what Carneal did.
That echoes what one of the West Side Middle School teachers said to me about Jonesboro. She says she's trying to warn people so that others won't die.
Oh,
Dave Grossman said, more softly this time.
It would have been funnier if you hadn't read ahead, Phil, and you just yelled it. Like,
I could do a version with that. This is a little shorter.
I'm picturing Jack like pulling the phone receiver away from every time Dave does that.
Oh,
Dave Grossman said, more softly this time.
the parents of the 3 precious girls who died are upset with me because what I had to offer was an explanation for the deaths of their daughters that was outside of Carneal himself. I think Carneal is to blame, but he is not the only one to blame. I was retained by Michael Carneal's parents to help prove that Carneal was influenced by certain violent entertainment products.
I just want to jump in at one point there. I have found no evidence that this is true. What he's claiming here that he was put on a retainer, the only person who's saying this is Dave. So I have no way of verifying whether that's true. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sir, please do not interrupt Dave Grossman while Dave Grossman is speaking. As I was saying, he was literally trained to kill those girls. I'm encouraged to hear that there is a lawyer somewhere who knows there is a problem with popular entertainment. You really ought to call the attorney in Paducah who represents these parents. I think they're fixin' to sue the entertainment industry. At least, I've heard noise about that. I think you could help them with what you know. They don't want to hear from me. They need to hear from you because lives are at stake. The boy who took their daughters from them was not the only one responsible. This is a hard thing to swallow. The notion that the boy who destroyed a huge part of their life is not pure evil. But we've got to let the people know that evil from an outside source helped turn someone into something he has not been before it entered his life. Michael Carneal was a killer trained by an industry to kill.
I thank Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman for his time and his service to our country, thinking both of his service in the military and in this new battle.
My brother, let's pray before you go.
Dave prayed fervently for the two of us. I was deeply moved by the words of this intense man. He prayed, among other things, that we would be able to fight the good fight together. When I heard those words, I knew I was right where God wanted me to be. And as we said goodbye, Dave said,
Jack, my favorite Bible verse on all this is Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Stay staunch, my brother.
I bid Dave Grossman goodbye, warning him that I would be calling him again. I had a sense something would come of this, and the fact that I didn't know what it was worried me and energized me at the same time. Once again, into an unknown place I went. Scene. Well done, everyone. So any thoughts on this exchange that the two of them have?
I mean, it almost read like a Darman play, actually. Like, why, I want to do this, and I want to do this too. Just so you know, I'm Christian. I love Christians. Let's be friends, you know?
Wait, you're a Christian? Whoa!
Did we just become best friends? There are a couple things about this. One, if you wanted to make this into like an erotic fan fiction, you wouldn't have to change very much.
Would I keep the same whoa or would I do a different one?
Hoooah. So yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out was that Dave in this he points out that the victims in the Jonesboro shooting, that he characterizes it like they didn't want to hear what I have to say. I think what probably happened was that him being, an opportunistic ghoul called these bereaved parents while they're mourning the deaths of their children and says, you know what we really need to do? We really need to sue the video games industry. We need to do, and I'd like to think of, and again, this is all imagining in my head, I'd like to think that they kind of identified who he was and what he was after and told him to go pound sand.
This reminds me of, like, say you were out to dinner at a restaurant and somebody you were with at the table choked on a piece of pasta and suffocated and died. And rather than sue the factory that created pasta that was dangerous for people or the restaurant or somebody who didn't know the Heimlich maneuver or didn't train the staff. You decided to sue the country of Italy for creating a cuisine that killed one of your loved ones.
That's a very good analogy. We're going to take down Big Meatball over this. So yeah, it's safe to say that Jack felt a really strong connection to Dave. Now, whether Dave also viewed Jack as a kindred spirit and comrade at arms or simply a means to an end, only Grossman knows for sure. In any case, by Jack's own admission, this interaction is what sparked his mad crusade against video games and set him on a path that would eventually lead him permanently losing the ability to practice law. And thanks to Grossman, he managed to get in touch with the families of several of the victims in the Heath High School shooting. And on April the 9th, 1999, following the end of Michael Cornell's trial, Thompson filed a $130 million wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of the families of the victims. Thompson also sued 2 pornography sites and the makers and distributors of the movie The Basketball Diaries and Natural Born Killers. He also sued id Software, makers of Doom and Quake, Nintendo of America, Sega of America, and Sony Computer Entertainment, the makers of all the major systems at that time. So he basically sued the video game industry over this. In a public statement after the filing, Thompson declared in his trademark style, now I am going to do the Jack Thompson voice, quote, "We intend to hurt Hollywood. We intend to hurt the video game industry. We intend to hurt the sex porn sites," end quote.
What other sorts of porn sites are there? Maybe you don't need to answer that.
He wasn't aware of mukbang videos. He's like, I'm not going to sue the food porn sites,
No, I like those. That Matt Stone, he can eat a chicken wing faster than anyone else.
Chicken.
So yeah, this becomes the start of his lawsuits against the video game industry, to say nothing of his pushing for legislation in states such as Louisiana and Utah, and his harassment campaigns and implicit threats of violence. And again, his wild path to his eventual disbarment in 2008. Lawsuits aside, Jack Thompson proved a loyal lieutenant to the lieutenant colonels during his mad moral crusade against video games. Jack became a sounding board for Dave's talking points, citing the same dodgy research as Dave Grossman in between calling video games murder simulators in his legal briefs and his press statements and his media appearances. So he begins to be another person advocating the same stuff that Dave is. As Jack Thompson explained in his old homepage, which was called stopkill.com, in language basically cribbing from Grossman, quote, "Recent medical brain scan studies at Harvard and Indiana University prove what Jack Thompson has been saying for 12 years. Children's brain functions are damaged by a steady diet of violent images and messages." As I said, that's not what the study says. The heads of the American Medical, Pediatric, and Psychiatric Associations have all testified before Congress that violent video games contribute to teen violence, as they are murder simulators teaching our kids to kill. And again, as an aside, he's kind of overstating that. The American Medical Association did say that it looked like there was a link between video game violence and aggression. They never went as far as he's claiming. Our nation is now swarming with thousands of mini Manchurian candidates, ready, willing, and able to act out the violence that they have been taught is fun and consequence-free. They are responsible criminally for what they do. The wealthy companies that incite them and train them to kill are responsible in money damages for their recklessness, end quote. And Jack, on his homepage, he had 3 outside links on the main page that linked to other people he connected to. One was the Lion and Lamb Project, which was another moral crusader media violence thing. The other was Dave Grossman's Killology research group. And you're never going to guess what the last one was. Rockstar.
No way.
His old rival Rockstar.
Wow.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief addendum to this part. We kind of ran short of time in the recording, and I wanted to make sure this is in there just to reinforce how influential Dave Grossman's ideas and his rhetoric have been to the way we think about violent video games as a political issue, and how that continues to resonate even in the present day, even when Dave Grossman's not directly involved. So, for example, following the February 14th, 2018 mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which left 17 people dead and another 17 people wounded on March the 8th, 2018, then U.S. President, and current subject of multiple criminal indictments as of this recording, Donald Trump, hosted a bunch of self-proclaimed media experts to get to the bottom of this terrible tragedy, / show that guns absolutely positively could not have played a role in it. And one of the people with whom we met was, of course, Dave Grossman. And for a more recent example, on May the 28th, 2022, Texas Senator and lover of trips to Cancun, Ted Cruz, gave a speech at the annual meeting of the National Rifle Association, which took place in the immediate aftermath of two high-profile mass shootings. On May the 14th, 2022, a gunman opened fire at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, killing 10, and 10 days later, on May the 24th, a teenage gunman opened fire in Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, killing 19 students and 2 teachers and wounding 17 others, while local police courageously cowered in their expensive body armor. Cruz, meanwhile, reflected on these 2 shootings that again left 31 people dead, reassuring attendees that there was just no way that access to guns could have played a role, notwithstanding the heavy ordnance the shooters were able to get their hands on, and suggesting a bevy of other possible causes, telling attendees, quote, "Tragedies like the events of this week were a mirror forcing us to ask hard questions, demanding that we see where our culture is failing, looking at broken families, absent fathers, declining church attendance, social media bullying, violent online content, desensitizing the act of murder in video games, chronic isolation, prescription drug and opioid abuse, and their collective effects on the psyche of young Americans," end quote. Reportedly, the crowd erupted into applause at the mere mention of violent video games as a possible cause of all this mass death, notwithstanding the fact that other countries have nearly the exact same access to video games, with somehow significantly fewer mass death events involving children than the good old US of A. Meanwhile, John Scott, host of the Fox News show Fox Report, commented following the Buffalo shooting that despite volumes of evidence the shooter was an avowed white supremacist who cited the Great Replacement theory in his manifesto and explicitly said that he went to that supermarket with the express goal of killing black people, that it was probably violent video games that caused the shooting, saying, quote, "It seems like these things have gotten so much worse since video games became so realistic and so violent," end quote. And compare that to Grossman's assessment of the virus of violence in the last section on Killing, where he asserted that crime rates are out of control, even if the real-world statistics say otherwise, and that violent media, especially those nasty interactive point-and-shoot games, must be the cause. And all of that, again, is to say that the self-proclaimed killologist is, in many respects, the central figure at the heart of the violent video game discussion in America, and his personal war on video games waged in houses of government, the courts, academia, and the court of public opinion have shaped a lot of what we think regarding the alleged harmful effects of violent video games. And I hope you'll pardon, again, the digression, because I feel like that point needed to be reinforced in this episode, because I think if you take nothing else from this, it's that close relationship Grossman has, again, to the way we think about violent video games, at least here in the United States. So apologies for the digression. Back to the show.
And so bringing things back, all of this is to say that Dave Grossman rests at the center of a lot of the way we think about the alleged impact of violent video games. And Grossman's tactics and talking points have had a profound impact on violent video games as a political and public health issue, their alleged effects, and their relationship to real-life violence. And whether or not he's explicitly involved, once you know what you're looking for, you start seeing him everywhere in the violent video game discussion, since he jumped onto the scene when he was lucky enough to have a school shooting happen in his hometown. So, whenever a moral crusader argues video games are training young people to kill, there's Dave. Whenever a politician introduces bills banning or restricting access to video games with objectionable content, there's Dave. Whenever someone cites specific evidence allegedly proving that violent video games are warping kids' minds, there's Dave. Whenever a lawyer like John DeCamp or Jack Thompson files a wrongful death lawsuit against the games industry, there's Dave. We now have politicians at all levels of power, both in the US and abroad, sharing ideas Grossman pitched way back in 1995 as a justification behind laws limiting access to banning video games or diverting resources away from things that might actually help limit mass shootings, like meaningful gun control or cracking down on right-wing extremist groups. We have Grossman-backed lawyers pushing frivolous lawsuits based on Grossman's ideas, sometimes bringing in Grossman himself as an expert witness in between citing studies promoted and supported by Dave Grossman. He's an Ouroboros of terrible ideas. And that's, I think, where we're going to wrap up today. And so we're just going to go around the horn real fast for people's thoughts on this.
How does Dave Grossman actually say, "Whoa"?
He types it a lot too. While we were talking about this, I looked a little bit on Facebook groups that he's on and stuff, and he posted a poem, and then the very first comment under it was from him with just "Hoooah," or however you say it. And it seems like he just kind of says it as a verbal tick almost. He was talking to some people do you know that wall's flame? I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Do you know that wall's flame retarded or not? Hoooah? You know why they did that? Hoooah? I don't know how he says it. I couldn't find a video, but it seems like he just, I'm speculating, but it seems like he says it a lot. So I hope he doesn't yell it the way that we were doing it. And if he does it all the time like that, that would be really disruptive.
Or maybe it's like you would say aso in Japanese. Hoooah. Hoooah. All right. I got the information I needed. That was my only question.
Any other thoughts, Kate?
Not much that we haven't already talked about. These guys just all seem really happy to talk to one another and support each other's opinions in a, fringe theory kind of way.
Hoooah. Hoooah.
Oh, indeed. I guess it's good to have supportive people in your life, even if they're reinforcing your worst impulses. But yeah, and so like I challenge you to think about, when the next mass shooting happens, set your clocks in the US. But watch politicians come out of the woodwork and say a lot of these same things, that video games are training people to kill, video games are desensitizing people. You see these points come up over and over and over again. And I came to realize, like, you see Dave at like the heart of a lot of this stuff, and really has a profound influence on the way we think about violent video games as a political issue. And so with that, let's start wrapping up. Next month, I'm planning to not do Dave. I mean, I've got something lined up if I can get my act together. And that'll do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Secret by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.